Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, Roz, for this chat.
Lovely to see you, Alice.
Knowing that you're a body psychotherapist and your work involves movement and song and writing and improvisation. And as we transition into this social isolation phase, I'm interested to know how you're managing that online, how your clients are responding, how your colleagues are responding. That's generally what I'd like to talk about. So maybe we can start with how your clients are responding.
Well, people are responding differently. I mean, many clients are adapting very quickly. People are finding their own way of managing the situation, and many are very glad to have continuity. Mm-hmm. Of course, some people have suffered very dramatic loss of income, so I'm reducing fees for people who've had to face that. Some people are facing great losses of other kinds. Some people are very worried about their health. So there's a lot of fear. Sometimes it's quite sort of diffuse anxiety. Other times it's more specific. So one thing that's very important at a time like that is to work with grounding and just processing the adjustment, just beginning to make sense of what's happening in this huge collective process. So I find the main two options I'm using are either the phone or Skype or Zoom. Mm-hmm. I actually find that working on the phone helps more with staying internally connected. I've done work on the phone for a long time. I have supervisees on the phone. And what I like about the phone is that I can listen from inside my body and listen deeply. And you can hear a lot in the voice, that every nuance of the voice has a lot of layers of meaning. And so in many ways, I prefer the phone. But some people really want to see a visual image of you, and that also brings different advantages. So if I'm working in a visual platform like Zoom or Skype, then there's more scope for mirroring, working with movement. So for example, one of the things I've been doing with some clients is just sort of getting them to pat their body, because I think that the sort of anxiety that people are feeling, people are losing a bit of a sense of physical boundary. The whole physicality of our life has been changed dramatically, and the normal things that people do, moving around, getting up, going out, taking exercise, so many of those things have ended. And so many things are happening online, which is fantastic. And, everyone's been very resourceful. Yeah. I've really been struck by organizations and individuals and communities adapting very quickly. I think many people were using it to some degree or another already. Mm-hmm. So with Skype, I think you have to work harder to stay embodied, because there's something about having, often it's just the face, although there's no reason why, you can't, for example, stand up. For example, I might, in some contexts, actually move, do something so that the client can get a sense. You don't have to be stuck in the chair. As you know, that's a theme of mine, moving out of the chair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuck in the chair.
Yeah.
And it's really important to keep rooted, I think, in the context of the fear that people feel. There's something, it becomes incredibly important to be in your body in the present moment, and to really track your breath and sort of very sort of steadying things like that.
I find it really interesting that you say that working on the phone and listening into your internal responses, that's a deeper way of working than working through Skype and working visually. That's
Mm.
not what I was expecting you would say as a body psychotherapist.
Mm.
That's,
I think it's because it's so internal. When you're on the phone, you know that it's more natural to go inward. You know, it's, of course it doesn't 100% guarantee it, because you can be on the phone and still be very distracted. And in fact, one of my clients I've been speaking to on the phone, I think because of her level of anxiety, is I can feel her distractedness. I can really feel. And so you can, and again, you can still do the body things through the phone, because you're just using your voice, and there's nothing more powerful than the human voice as a medium of communication, tonality, rhythm, pace. We can lift people up with a brighter voice, or we can really encourage them to go into something steadier and deeper by actually deepening and slowing our own voice.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I was speaking with Stephen Porges yesterday. I had a video call with him, and he was saying exactly that. He was saying, you know, intonation and prosody and the importance of that, and the out breath when you're speaking, to sort of slow the out breath down, and how that stimulates the relaxation in the nervous system.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think it's very interesting. I hadn't thought how integral the voice is, and how creative one can be as a therapist in these circumstances.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what I'm finding with my colleagues and my supervisees as well. People are being very creative. One or two people, for example, maybe working with their clients outside, keeping the appropriate distance that we're required to keep, but actually being outside, which again is very grounding and very, very helpful. And I think for me, I find the very bright sunshine we've had,
Amazing.
and you know, the fact that you can hear the birds more clearly because there's less background noise and the air is fresher. I mean, these have been real tonics, I think, at this time.
Yes, I absolutely agree. It's the most beautiful weather, and I keep looking out and seeing butterflies and birds and things. It's it's quite the contrast, isn't it, between you know, why it is so quiet and why we've got time to look out the window. You know, that contrast is quite quite stark. So in your work, usually would you use touch?
I use touch sometimes, but not a lot. I think a lot of my work has shifted more towards movement, and the reason for that is that movement is all about self-agency. You know, when you make a movement, it's you who's making it. It's not being done to you or provided for you. So therefore, conscious tracking and use of movement enhances the proprioceptive feedback. And I always think it's interesting, this word proprioception means to receive oneself. And literally, the proprioceptors are receptors in our muscles and tendons that actually tell the brain where the body is in space. And so feeling a definite sense of your own body, it makes an enormous difference to psychological processing, because it's essential, you know, ultimately to have a sense that we are agents of our own experience, and that is not a cognitive belief. I mean, you can try and bring it in cognitively, but ultimately, when you feel your body, you know it's incontrovertible. And sometimes, I mean, often, of course, people's experience of their body is quite frightening. So the work of a therapist is to help somebody get a sense of the resourcefulness of the body. You know, that you can find calmer states, that you can feel how a movement expresses and serves a purpose, that is, it's expressive, it's enlivening, maybe it's like pressing the hands together. Let's say if you feel you're losing touch with your center, just really pressing your hands, locating a sense of center within yourself. Because one of the things that we struggle with, everybody now in our modern world, is that the sense of self is so much located in the image, the photograph, the appearance, and actually, of course, it isn't there. Your subjectivity and your self-ownership is not in the image. It's in the felt sense.
It takes me back to earlier in the conversation where you said that some of your clients are having this experience of their boundaries feeling rather diffuse. And therefore this sort of anchoring into an internal experience seems absolutely critical. I mean, how might you do that with a client on a Skype call or via voice? And why do you think that their boundaries feel kind of diffuse like that?
Well, I don't, the last bit first. Everybody to some degree, but some people more than others, has had the rug pulled out from under their feet. You know, in a way we could see it coming, the information, we could see it in China in January. But it was a bit like, I can't remember, there was a newscaster who used this image that caught it perfectly for me. It's a bit like seeing a huge wave coming in from the sea, and you see the wave coming and you know it's traveling towards you, but there is a sense of something impending, but it's kind of it can be hard to respond until things happen. And of course, things have happened very fast. They've been very dramatic. Choices taken away from people, livelihoods disrupted, fears for your own health or those you love. So no wonder it awakens a survival instinct for everybody. But for those who already have trauma, of course, it's like an echo. It's like a repetition.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an external threat.
Yeah, that one can't control or know, or
we can't control. We don't know how long it's going to last, but it looks like it's going to last for months. And so the fear response is going to be fight, flight, but we're asked to stay at home, so we can't run away.
Yeah, so we might go into a sort of feigned death. I mean, it could go a bit further than that, couldn't it? Sort of flop.
The immobility, yes. So some people go down into the hypertonic, and some people go up into hyperarousal, but then feel very caged in a small space. So it's very important in this context to be able to do something physical. So working with grounding, pushing feet into the floor, working with, and the arms are important too, because our arms, how we push away or pull something towards us. So something as simple as pushing against the wall, or feeling your back against the chair. And I think in this instance, the therapist it's often helpful to be quite directive, because at this point, it depends on the client. Some clients can carry on exploring their inner world because they've got enough containment and safety. But for many people, there is this feeling of unsafety and fear, and therefore the first thing they need is some sense of how to stabilize the nervous system. So that's working with the breath and movement and image, and it's the therapist's own regulation of the client through voice, through their understanding, because it's also about creating a meaning and creating links, and people being able to understand how what is happening now is a trigger for past fears.
That might be quite hard for some clients to grasp, because it's quite a kind of odd concept unless you're in the field, but I think that it's really important to recognize that you might be having a double whammy of what's actually happening now, reflecting something that you've experienced in the past or intergenerationally even.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And it's very important to balance that, because we have to, you know, respect that people's fears now are not, you know, there is a good reason to fear. No, I feel fear sometimes. Much of the time I'm fine, and it's in a way it's good to be working, and I'm, you know, it's good to have that, and that puts me in touch with my resourcefulness. But
yes, absolutely. That, I think that's another very interesting area as well, which is the client's concern for the therapist.
Yes.
Especially if your therapist is in a higher risk group, which you are not. But no. I think that's interesting. I wonder if you've had clients concerned about you, you know, are you isolating, and who are you with, and those sorts of things, and how you manage that.
Yeah, some clients have been really wanted to know, and in that sense, perhaps it's changed the relationship slightly, in the sense that I've been more open and more direct about things. It's very, you know, I had a few weeks ago, I was slightly unwell, and I felt I had to be really explicit with my clients, and I had to say, no, I haven't had a fever, I haven't had a cough, in a way that we wouldn't normally disclose quite so much.
Yes.
But I think it is important for clients to know how you are.
Yeah.
Although, of course, if you are in a high risk group, that's a more complex decision about what to say or not to say.
And allowing some level of concern without it sort of taking over. So yes, I think it's interesting, isn't it, to be quite clear and real. Absolutely.
Yes, and some people's pattern from the past will be to go into caretaking mode,
right?
And so that also has to be named and understood, that they may be responding from that as a way of surviving.
I'm also really interested in what you would think about the illness itself, and how the illness is this kind of unknown virus that impacts the lungs.
So in Chinese medicine, the lungs are associated with grief, actually, and conditions of the lung are associated with grief, because they have a model that relates all the organs to emotions. And we know that, for example, when people are sad, they sigh. You don't take a deep breath in. You know, taking a deep breath in is what you do when you feel alive and you want to be alive. Taking a deep breath in is, oh, I want to fill up, I want to expand. So that's usually, we breathe deeply when we feel happy or joyful.
Yeah.
And then the breath becomes shallow when we're sad or when we're anxious. But then it can also become a circular thing, habitual shallow breathing, which is frankly just normal in our society. That's probably most people. Can also keep the energy lower. If you get into a breath pattern that perhaps got established in childhood, that also limits your energy and your well-being. And part of what we do, all psychotherapists in a way, at working with feeling. And when somebody really gets in touch with the feeling, and maybe there's sound or tears, or maybe just fully feeling something or saying it with feeling, well, then the breath changes naturally. You know, we don't have to do anything to breath, it just changes.
Have you got any advice from your knowledge for anyone who gets the illness, and how to sort of, what to do if your lungs are you know, if you've got trouble with your lungs with this virus, what would be something to do in that instance?
Well, I think what I would recommend for people, if they're having trouble with their lungs, is to find some kind of maybe music or meditation or something soothing, because when you can't breathe very well because your lungs are affected, that can create in its own sense of panic, because when we can't get a breath in, that can be frightening. So it's really important, and people who have asthma often have learnt this as a skill.
Mm.
It's really important to practice centering and self-soothing, maybe to sort of touch yourself gently, speak to yourself in a kind way, almost like holding a baby or soothing a child, because you want to be as calm as you can, actually, if your lungs are struggling, so that you can take a breath in without hitting up against a restriction.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So obviously soothing the nervous system and avoiding, because there's this fear of this illness that the lungs and the breathing is going to get very difficult, and then you're going to end up in the ICU, which we all want to avoid. Yeah. So if we can avoid that by being present, acknowledging what's happening in our lungs, but not freaking out about it, one could potentially slow down the impact.
Yes, I think it can make a lot of difference. And this is, my concern about people who are on their own. And I mean, the government advice to self-isolate is obviously practical and medical and necessary in this current crisis. But I do really, really feel for people who are on their own and told that they mustn't see anybody for 3 months now. That, and some people will have the technology and will have lots of WhatsApp connections and friends and family. But I think for others, that's a really difficult thing. And so perhaps the radio is important, so that you still have a sense of things going on in the world, but perhaps not too much news.
Thinking of bodies and bodies being together, there's co-regulation and there's self-regulation. And we need to have had a lot of good co-regulation in our lives in order to be able to self-regulate.
Yes.
If you haven't had lots of good co-regulation experiences and you're self-isolating, that's an enormous challenge.
Yes. Some people are finding new resources that they didn't know they had. I know there's been a lot of community building, people, WhatsApp groups for a street and people meeting online. And for some people that may not be an option, but maybe it's really important to go outside. It's important to look at the flowers, listen to the birds. I mean, the birds are beautiful, and they're really singing loudly, and it seems to me they're singing louder. And I personally, I find the sound of bird song really uplifting and soothing.
Yeah, it's really heartening, isn't it? I think for me, it's something about a greater perspective, not just us human beings with this terrible illness, but the planet and the other life that goes on around us, and tuning into that as something to connect with if we're unable to connect with parents and friends in the way that we really want to.
Some people are really finding that, and I know that some people are having really quite profound experiences of connection and peace and simplicity, because we've had a lot of options taken away. I mean, some people are still quite busy, including therapists. Many therapists are busy. I'm busy. I'm effectively working full time still. But even so, there are still fewer activities that are possible, and what that does open is the door for quieter contemplation, appreciation of the moment, of the sun, of the birds.
I mean, I think if you're a parent with children at home, there's not much time for that. But I'm finding it interesting that even though everything's really pared down and there's no other activities, there's still so much with all the schoolwork and things. But I agree, those who are that don't have children around to teach and to be with, there is a lot of space that opens up, which can be very creative, but also can be quite ominous. Because too much space is something that a lot of people try to avoid, because what lies within can be challenging. So it's very individualized, isn't it, how people will cope. And then there's obviously those who are healthcare workers.
Yes.
And, you know, I'm wondering what psychotherapists can do to support healthcare workers. Yeah.
Well, there has been a move by Robert Downes and the Relational School to set up a project to offer free psychotherapy to healthcare workers. I can imagine it's very important for healthcare workers to have a space to talk about what they're witnessing, what concerns them, the level of stress they're carrying. I've been very concerned to hear of doctors dying, and that's concerning. It's concerning both because it's human life and because they're dying as a result of their work, but also it struck me that these are obviously not people in their 70s and 80s, and I imagine it's because they're exhausted. So I have a lot of concern for healthcare workers, and I hope that they do find connection with therapists. There's a free psychotherapy service as well. Many therapists are cutting their fees and offering free therapy. I think a lot of altruism.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's important to communicate to people that there are places to go to. It's the relational school, isn't it, that Robert Downes has got a list of therapists offering sessions, which is great, and hopefully that will other organizations will do the same.
Yes, I mean, I think on the creative front, it's also a liminal time. It's an in-between space. It's a space where we have to step back from action, and for those that can find a way to tap into that space, I think it can also be a creative time. Well, and creative ways of doing therapy as well, you know, that you can still draw and exchange drawings or send audio clips or little films. For some people doing therapy online is very difficult because coming into the private space doesn't feel very safe, and they've lost the place they go to, which was away from home or away from work. But for others, I think there's a new kind of intimacy in sharing their home with the therapist. You know, I've been really aware of that as I've been online with people. You get a little picture of them in their home, and it's different. Maybe we'll all use these things more in the future. I mean, lots of people, of course, have used online, often as a bridge if a client is traveling or away, or in certain circumstances. And I think what I've noticed is how the strength of the connections means that actually the relationship is actually more important than the medium. So actually you can change the medium and you think it's going to be a huge difference, and it is in one way, but in another way the relationship is there. And that's what I've really been struck by, is the sustaining nature of relationship and connection. So something hasn't shifted, something stays the same.
Yes, and that's actually very important for early trauma cases, that if you have created a relationship that can be ongoing regardless of the medium, that's a huge success for many clients. And then there will also be those who find it really hard because they either are not so far into their therapy, or they have an avoidant or an ambivalent sort of attachment style, or whichever way you want to formulate it, that will find it more difficult, that you have to hold on to a bit more, I suppose.
Yes, and some clients don't like the shift of medium. They don't want it. They want if they can't have you in the room, it feels too disappointing, almost desecrating somehow. It almost takes away something. So I think for some people there's a fear, and of course some people fear it, but you actually need to give it a try, and that's what I'm encouraging people who feel doubtful, because people have also been surprised, that you can recreate the same kind of depth,
Mm,
actually.
I suppose it can bring up feelings of sort of depersonalization slightly, maybe.
Yeah.
There's something slightly unreal about it, or if there's a timing issue, with a lag, or if the connection goes down, that could be very disconcerting. But I suppose in that case, we're talking about higher risk clients.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I think it can be depersonalizing. I think that's why I've been kind of quite active with people, trying to remind people and support people to be in their body,
Yeah,
touching, um, because if you're really, really touching and squeezing, and okay, for some people that feels very foreign, but I think sometimes you need to explain that there's a point to it.
yeah,
And it's not an intellectual thing, it's a practical thing. What is more helpful for some people is to write. Many people find writing diaries and notes is their main method of keeping together. I think often people whose minds are very full, very quick, very associative, actually they may already have a habit of writing.
mm,
And there can be something about writing emails and texts, giving shape and form and getting a response in words that works better for some people.
so you might do that instead of a therapy session. You might read and respond to an email.
Sometimes, I mean, of course, I've done that anyway. I mean, that is can be part of ongoing work with clients already.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah, and so it can be a bridge. It's another bridge, I think.
yeah,
And again, if people feel that they don't have a safe space and they don't want to talk, in a room like at their own bedroom, or even maybe they don't have a car, then
mm.
actually writing down, and also writing down lasts longer. You can reread the text or reread the email from your therapist.
Yeah, it's almost like a transitional something
Yes,
to hold on to until the next session if the
yes.
client is really in need of connection. I think we're drawing to a close at the end of this conversation. So is there anything else that you think is really important at this bizarre time to think about for the therapist, for the patient, client, colleague, the Confer community?
Hmm. Well, we haven't spoken about the sadness and the loss. And
Yeah.
I suppose one thing that I'm finding is it's really important to be with the waves of sadness
Yeah.
and the seriousness of the situation. And some people are sending around funny things. Occasionally, I might smile at something like that, but actually, I think it's really important to stay connected to ourselves and to others. And that connection, sometimes that connection comes through laughter, but sometimes it comes by bearing witness to and acknowledging what is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's part of staying grounded and stabilized,
Mm.
and humor can help us alleviate moments of anxiety, but really real stability comes from feeling yourself, being connected to nature, being connected to others, breathing,
Yeah.
and sense making and meaning making. And people will make different meanings, and some people can, I mean, many people have observed that this crisis has given us a taste of what it could be like to be in a world where we're not traveling all the time, where
Mm.
the air is clearer, and
Mm.
and there are many other kinds of meanings to make.
And a narrative that can hold all of the grief, the anxiety, and the potential hopeful outcomes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
thank you for that. That's really grounding, which I think is the theme of the conversation, is the importance of trying to remain grounded and centered with our experience and our clients' experiences. Yeah.
yes.
Thank you so much, Roz. It's been
Well,
really lovely speaking to you.
it was good to talk to you.